What if I told you that the Netherlands is secretly becoming Europe's next superpower? Quite a claim, isn't it? Yet, as we peel back the layers on this fascinating country, we find a series of compelling indicators that suggest just that. We're not talking about military might or territorial conquests here. We're referring to a different kind of power. It's a power that's seen in economic growth rates that outpace many of its larger European neighbors. It's a power that's felt in the increasing influence the Netherlands wields in the political corridors of Brussels and beyond. It's a power that's reflected in the country's innovative spirit, its commitment to sustainability, and its ability to attract top talent from around the globe. What's even more intriguing is how this small nation, with a population of just over 17 million, is quietly ascending the ranks of global power players. It's a story of David and Goliath proportions, with the Netherlands playing the role of David, of course. Yet, unlike the biblical tale, this story is unfolding not on a battlefield, but on the world's economic and political stages. The Netherlands is showing us that size doesn't always matter. Rather, it's about strategic positioning, sound policies, and a willingness to adapt and innovate. It's about leveraging strengths and turning perceived weaknesses into opportunities. It's about being open to the world and yet uniquely Dutch at the same time. In the following scenes, we're going to delve deeper into the factors behind this remarkable rise. We'll explore the Netherlands' economic surge, its growing political influence, the secrets to its success, and what the future might hold for this small but mighty nation. So, are you intrigued yet? Let's dive in and explore how this small country is making big waves. First, let's talk about the economy. You might be surprised to learn just how well the Netherlands is doing. This small but mighty country is quickly climbing the economic ladder, leaving many larger nations in its wake. In the realm of gross domestic product, or GDP, the Netherlands is a force to be reckoned with. It's one of the world's top 20 economies, boasting a GDP of nearly $1 trillion. That's right, trillion with a T. This figure is even more impressive when you consider that the Netherlands is a compact country with a population of just over 17 million. The Netherlands is not just about making money, but also about ensuring its citizens enjoy a high quality of life. The unemployment rate is refreshingly low, hovering around just 3%. This is a testament to the country's healthy and dynamic job market, which is continually fueled by its key industries. Speaking of industries, let's delve into the powerhouses driving the Dutch economic machine. At the forefront, we find technology. The Netherlands is home to some of the most innovative tech companies in the world, and it's a leading player in the digital economy. It's no wonder that it's often referred to as the Silicon Valley of Europe. Agriculture is another major player. Despite its small size, the Netherlands is the globe's second-largest exporter of food, bested only by the United States. It's a true testament to Dutch ingenuity and efficiency. And let's not forget about energy. The Netherlands is a key player in the European energy market, with a significant portion of its economy dedicated to the production and export of natural gas. Clearly, the Netherlands isn't just surviving, it's thriving. But there's more to this story. How did this small, flat country become a global economic powerhouse? What's the secret behind its success? And most importantly, what does the future hold for the Netherlands? Stay tuned as we unravel these questions and more in the upcoming scenes. Now let's shift gears and talk about politics. The Netherlands, the land of tulips, windmills, and wooden shoes, is also known for its significant political influence. This influence is not confined within its borders, but extends across the European Union and beyond, onto the global stage. In the heart of Europe, the Netherlands has been a hotbed of political innovation, often leading the way with policies that are progressive and forward-thinking. Its commitment to issues like environmental sustainability, human rights, and international law is highly regarded worldwide. This nation's political clout is also reflected in its key political figures. Prime Minister Mark Rutte, for instance, is not just a national leader, but a respected voice in the European Union. His pragmatic and level-headed approach to politics has earned him a reputation as a bridge builder in a time of increasing global polarization. Another factor adding to the Netherlands' political influence is its active role in international organizations. The country is home to the International Court of Justice, the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. This underscores the country's commitment to maintaining international peace and security. Furthermore, the Netherlands is an active participant in NATO and the World Trade Organization, further amplifying its voice on the global stage. But the influence of the Netherlands isn't just about its leaders or its role in international organizations. It's also about the Dutch people, who are known for their openness to new ideas and their willingness to engage in dialogue. They are part of a democratic tradition that values consensus and cooperation. In the world of politics, the Dutch model is often held up as an example of how a small country can punch well above its weight. It's a testament to the power of progressive policies, strong leadership, and a commitment to international cooperation. So the Netherlands isn't just a small country in Europe, it's a major player on the world stage. But how did this happen? So, how is the Netherlands doing it? What's their secret? The Netherlands' rise to power is no accident. It's a result of deliberate choices, strategic planning, and an unyielding commitment to progress. Let's take a closer look at some of the key factors that have contributed to their success. First, let's talk about location. The Netherlands occupies a strategic position in Europe, with access to some of the continent's most significant markets. This has made it a hub for international trade and business. But it's not just about geography. The Dutch have used their location to their advantage, investing heavily in infrastructure to facilitate commerce. Ports, highways, airports, rail networks. They've built an impressive logistical framework that supports their economic ambitions. Next, education. The Netherlands places a high value on education, recognizing it as a vital tool for economic development and societal progress. This has resulted in a highly educated workforce that is competitive on the global stage. Moreover, the Netherlands' education system encourages creativity, critical thinking, and entrepreneurship, qualities that are essential in today's innovation-driven economy. Speaking of innovation, this brings us to another crucial factor: a commitment to research and development. The Dutch government and businesses invest heavily in R&D, fostering an environment that supports invention and innovation. The Netherlands is home to some of the world's leading tech companies, and Dutch inventions and innovations are making waves globally. Lastly, sustainability. The Netherlands is a global leader in sustainability, with ambitious goals to reduce carbon emissions and transition to a circular economy. This commitment to sustainability is not just good for the planet, it's also becoming a competitive advantage as consumers and businesses alike place a higher value on sustainable practices. So, how is the Netherlands doing it? They're leveraging their location, investing in education and infrastructure, and committing to innovation and sustainability. These are the secrets to their success. It's clear that the Netherlands isn't just lucky, it's strategic. But what does this mean for the future? So, what does the future hold for the Netherlands? As the dawn of a new era approaches, the Netherlands stands at the brink of unprecedented possibilities. This small nation, blessed with a strategic location, a robust economy, and a progressive society, is steadily ascending the global stage. But like any other country, it faces its share of challenges and opportunities. In terms of challenges, climate change looms large. As a country largely below sea level, the Netherlands is particularly vulnerable to rising sea levels and extreme weather events. But the Dutch are no strangers to battling the sea. They've been doing it for centuries, and they're using their expertise in water management to turn this challenge into an opportunity. They're leading the world in innovative solutions to climate change, from building floating cities to pioneering green energy technologies. The Netherlands also faces the challenge of maintaining its economic growth in an increasingly competitive global market. However, its strong focus on innovation, especially in sectors like technology and agriculture, positions it well for the future. The Dutch are known for their entrepreneurial spirit and their ability to adapt to change, qualities that will be crucial in the years to come. But what does all this mean for the rest of Europe and the world? Well, as the Netherlands continues to grow in influence, it could play a key role in shaping the future of the European Union. It could champion causes like climate change mitigation and sustainable development, and set an example for other nations to follow. Moreover, its economic success could provide a blueprint for other countries looking to build a prosperous, balanced economy. The Dutch model of combining economic growth with social equality and environmental sustainability could serve as a beacon of hope in a world grappling with inequality and environmental degradation. The future is always uncertain, but one thing is clear: the Netherlands is a country to watch. So, what do you think the future holds for the Netherlands? Comment below and don't forget to subscribe for more insights like these.